There we go. Hello. Hello,
Hi,
Barbara.
good to
Today,
see you. It's been quite a long time, isn't it?
yes, it has been a
Yeah,
long time. And
yeah,
today is November 29, 2019, and
yeah.
we are together to possibly talk about shame, guilt, death, and decolonization.
It's a lot to cover in short time.
And who knows where we'll go once we get
Yeah,
started.
that's good.
So,
So
yeah,
you want to kick
very.
off then, because your shame was your kind of up thing at the moment, and then
Yes,
I'll come
I
in a
was
little.
just saying that I was working on my chapter on shame and unconscious contracts in my book.
Mhm.
And last night I had this very interesting moment. It was Thanksgiving here in the United States, and I was helping to make dinner, and I was banging an ice bag on the counter, and a little kid, because it was all frozen, and I wanted to, get ice into the ice bucket, and the little kid came running in and said, "What happened? What happened?" And my friend who was making dinner said, "Sarah hit me." Which was obviously not true. I was all the way across the kitchen. It was just a piece of silliness. But it landed for me as a shame, even though it was
Oh,
teasing,
really?
and it
Right.
landed for me as shame, as like,
Right. Right.
and so I have this sense that I strayed into. Uh, I was exploring it just before we got on the call. A sense that I must have some sort of deep unconscious contract, a fine contract in many ways, but not to hurt my mother.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
A- And so that even the implication that I would harm a person, a female person older than myself, I think it just, like, I think if it had been a man who said, "Sarah hit me," it would have been a different,
Right.
a
It's
different
like almost like
outcome.
your body caved in when you said that. Yes, it's
Yeah,
like sort
yeah,
of
it really did.
caving in feeling. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm really, really in this wondering about the relationship between the contracts we make with ourselves and the ways in which we're bound by ties of loyalty, love, care, tenderness.
Yeah.
Um, but there was some kind of muffled quality to this that's quite deep, quite enervating, that robs my life energy. So
Mhm.
that was a very
And
interesting.
easily missed. I mean, I
Yeah,
see that, particularly as a grandmother, the sort of ways that we can unwittingly shame children and not even
yeah,
notice.
yeah, yeah,
It's like it's gone. You
yeah,
missed the moment, and
yeah.
actually they went into a shame place at that point.
Right, right.
Yeah. I mean, I can
So,
remember school situations as well. Like I remember dropping my dinner and the teacher standing me up in front of the whole dining room and saying, "This person just dropped her dinner." That's the kind of excruciating shame of,
oh.
just dropped my dinner. It's all I did. So horrendous, but no awareness in the teacher of what she was doing and the effect of
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
So yeah, I mean, probably with the best of intentions, wanting to use me as an example of what not to do and all
Yes,
the
don't drop your dinner, or you will be shamed publicly.
be shamed. Exactly. But I remember also from my Gestalt training, hearing that shame can be the opposite of rage.
Ah,
Like I am in a way annihilating myself
ah,
instead of annihilating somebody else. And that
mm,
resonated with me. Like
ah,
on a kind of somatic level, I can get that.
yeah,
Wow, I'm
yeah,
totally wiping myself out here.
uh-huh,
Who do
yeah.
I really want to wipe out? Maybe in
Yeah,
your instance, your mother.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it wasn't my mother who said this to me. It was a
I
friend,
know.
but I had this sense of, that it was somehow, it was so heavy that it seemed quite, inordinately extreme given the circumstances. Yeah.
So, what do you think in that instance the vow is, the promise is to your mother?
Well, it may have to do with the shame rage pair,
Right.
that you learned in Gestalt, um, that that in some way, all responsive life energy of self-protection is subsumed
Mm-hmm.
into a kind of a rigid structure of um, uh, sort of self-obliteration or not existing somehow. So
Yeah.
I think, yeah, I think the contract is quite deep and is something like, I will not, I will not harm my mother.
Mm.
In order to, I will not harm my mother. Just trying to catch this heaviness and collapse.
Mm.
In order to I will not, it's like I will not respond to my mother's aggression. Gosh, it's elusive because it's so big and very familiar in terms of like a kind of a depressive state.
Mm. Otherwise, I might annihilate her.
Oh yeah, very much so. I think that's there to keep from, and also holding the delicacy with which my beloved mother could be annihilated. I mean that she didn't have much resilience. That it had to, that I imagine it had to be, that things had to be very quiet
Right.
in order for her to be able to survive anything in
Mm.
some ways. Yeah.
And it's touching how children so young know that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
That we
they
already,
tune in so strongly, don't they?
yeah, and that research that we talked about before, the research of Beatrice Beebe showing this, that this movement is happening before the age of 4 months, long before we have
Incredible.
words.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they know what range of feelings are permitted and what aren't. Yeah.
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 And what happens when we respond, what if the rage escapes?
Yeah.
Is our mother obliterated? We can tell because there's dissociation and there's a departure from the dyad, and all of a sudden it's life-threatening, really, in a way, for the baby.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or will we be obliterated?
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm. It's big stuff, Shane. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so I mean, I'd be interested in hearing from you. How do you work with somebody who you see on that threshold of shame? I've just done the 2 days rage and passion actually
Oh,
with
very good.
Guy Francis, and one of the things we became really conscious of in this particular group was the importance of that threshold where you can tip over into, in some instances, shame, yeah,
Uh,
or in other instances, rage, or or dissociation. Like what's happening just before you do that
yeah. Yeah.
that
What
takes you
is it?
over the edge into some other state that you weren't in before. That makes
Yeah.
sense too. Yeah, and I don't know how that relates to what's going on in the brain at the time.
Well, it's
So
very I think it very much relates to these thresholds of what we, as you said, like these thresholds of what are, as babies, what are we learning that we
yeah,
can do and not do? And because it's so, we tend to think of ourselves as individuals rather than thinking of ourselves in the dyad.
absolutely, and in the system as a whole,
Right, right.
we can be happily relaxing and having tea as children and playing, and all of a sudden there's an explosion. One of the
Yeah,
characters explodes. Like, where did that come from?
yeah, yeah,
We're taken by surprise and we freeze or whatever we do to cope with that.
yeah,
And that is in the system, isn't
yeah,
it?
yeah,
Traumatized parents,
yeah,
traumatized children, immediately.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So one of the things that I'm always wondering about as I work with clients that are carrying a heavy weight of shame
Mm-hmm.
is, uh, I think that there's sort of a scaffolding of exploration
Mm-hmm.
that I do, um, starting out with like really some of the basic entanglements that can be present, um, that there can be a very basic entanglement between uh, between rest and death, where a client has this sense of total exhaustion from nervous system, from trying to deal with nervous systems that are traumatized and out of control. And the only thing that seems like it would bring any rest would be death.
Right.
That can be a huge shame burden, because then
And is there a state just before that of collapse?
definitely, I mean, I think there's like a multiple levels of collapse, you know,
Right.
that happen with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And then what happens if we clear the entanglement between rest and death? What happens if death becomes clearly death and rest becomes a different possibility? A possibility of living without the burden of other people's nervous systems, or the burden of knowing. So often I have clients who have been told by their mothers that they weren't wanted, or that they were that their lives were a burden. In heavily religious societies, when a mother has a child out of wedlock, and then has to live and raise that child as a single mother in this sort of chronic state of shame, then the child carries that shame.
I mean, they
And
carry it in the womb, presumably.
yes,
Sure,
absolutely.
there in the womb, isn't it?
Yeah. So then the next or a next possibility is this wondering about, to what extent are we carrying it systemically? To what extent are we carrying the shame?
And how do you spot shame? I think that's a really crucial thing. I don't know if you remember, Jonathan Houghton wrote a really good article, I don't know how many journals ago, 3 or 4 journals ago in the known field.
I think I must have missed it. Do you want to just do a quick outline?
Well, he was basically talking about, as a facilitator, it's really important to be conscious of shame, that we don't fall into re-shaming somebody unwittingly, you know, because we can get caught in the field so easily and not realize we're caught in the field.
Yeah, it's so true.
And so kind of, you know, what is it we need to look out for in terms of someone approaching shame? I mean, for me, one of the things is that kind of collapse and the difficulty in looking, and you know, the eyes drop down, that kind of thing. The whole system kind of goes in on itself.
Yeah.
And that needs very careful management somehow. And I mean, I've had people say, I really want to hide, you know, so I would let them hide, throw a blanket over their head and let them stay in there if they want to. You know? So it would be so easy to think that you're helping the client by saying, oh, but how about looking, or whatever, you know, how about looking around the group? And then they step over the threshold. It's the same thing, that threshold of the shame base and into avoiding whatever it is they're trying to deal with, you know. So I just think it needs really careful management.
Yeah, and an understanding of its internal structure. That we're in a, that when someone moves into a shame place, it's very often connected with something they're telling themselves, or that they're inside, that it's an inside job rather than an outside job. Yeah.
And you know, I mean, in the Gestalt process, you have to really accept where you are before you can do anything different. And as a facilitator, we have to come alongside the client and really let them fall into accepting where they are before trying to come out into some other place. You know, it's like, I want to hide. Okay, my body's collapsing. Okay, your body's collapsing. Allow yourself to collapse. Allow yourself to not look. Hide under a blanket. Take as long as you need, you know.
And one of the other cues for me is a sense of not being worthy of life, or not being worthy of help, or not being worthy of receiving a constellation, or not being worthy of the group's time, the group spending time and life energy. All of these things feel like breadcrumbs leading us toward, you know, shame states. And the next piece that comes for me now is misattunement, the shame being in an original dyad that's severely misattuned. So there's some very beautiful writing in both in Alan Shore's work. He writes extensively about the right hemisphere in psychotherapy, but also in the writing about Shore's work, just an exquisite couple of pages that are about how misattunement creates a shame state.
Yeah.
That if in the original dyad, the mother's not able to attune to the little one, not able to really guess or get right, that none of her guesses are really dead on for what's wrong with the little one. The little one's hungry and the mother adjusts the temperature in the room. The little one's cold and the mother gets something out to try to play. The little one's in pain from stomach stuff, and the mother changes the bit. It's just like there's no.
I'm thinking about the child that's looking down, and the mother, the father sometimes goes, "Look at me when I'm talking to you,"
Right.
Which is exact opposite of what the child needs to.
Yeah, that's so true.
Don't look away from me. Look at me.
Right. When the child is showing the sign of, of shame. Yeah. And what the parent presumably wants the child to be experiencing if they're in that scolding place. Yeah.
Don't ignore me. Don't ignore me.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh. Oh.
Horrible to witness.
Yeah. So there's something in our work, I think, that can create a meta awareness, like a way to bring misattunement into a constellation and see how it's almost like this thing that you were saying where we come alongside the client and let them experience what it is that's really happening.
I mean, it reminds me of a woman called Viola Brody that I worked with many, many years ago, who used to work with severely traumatized children, hyperactive children who couldn't be in contact or anything. And she would just do these, she'd be playing with them mostly, but she would reach out to touch them and they would pull away in their body. And then she'd say, "Oh, did I hurt you?" So she was like trying to attune to what the child's bodily reaction was and name it,
Yeah.
And I've retained that. And when I'm working with a client sometimes and I miss them, I kind of go, "Oh, did I miss you? What happened there on that threshold?"
Yeah.
I feel like I've lost you somewhere, So that's the misattunement, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's having the awareness that I've lost somebody. Yeah.
I had this happen in a slightly different way, but this brings up a moment that happened recently where I was was very engaged with what my client was telling me, and then I rocked back in my chair to breathe and to kind of let myself integrate what should be the next step, but that rocking back in my chair was interpreted by the group as an opening for them to bring. It was almost like they lost faith in my holding in that moment. I think the postural change was so great from my leaning forward, leaning into, and then I wanted to take this space, but I think, I needed a transparency about taking the space. It was such an interesting moment.
So they were misattuned to you.
Yeah. And I was sending a cue that was not the cue that I had any interest in sending at all.
And did that have resonance for the client's work and their family system? Because I'm just thinking about fields,
Yeah, exactly. Probably. At this moment, I don't even remember who the client was. I just remember this moment of trying to figure out what had happened. I was like, why are you suddenly, I was like, have you lost faith in me? Or have you suddenly decided to, that you guys need to be the facilitators? And they're like, no, your body, something happened with your body. I thought you were opening it up. And so,
and then what does that mean for the client and the client's field? Their system that's being played out here in some way.
Yeah, very good question.
Everything that happens is information.
It's
isn't
so
it?
true. It's so true.
And there's so much that happens in
Yeah.
the field. So that meta position you're talking about is so crucial, isn't it?
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
whoa,
Yeah.
what are we doing here? You know,
Yes. And
somehow I've
yeah.
just sat back. That's all I've done. But it has such a weight to it.
Yeah.
Isn't that
Yeah.
fascinating?
Mm-hmm.
Does this
Yeah.
speak to you, client,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and your
Yeah.
system?
Yeah. And yeah, how have we taken on our client system in our
Yeah,
bodies? Such a good question.
yeah.
Yeah.
I remember years ago now, I was doing a workshop with Franz Rupert, and there were loads of, this is when he used to work in a very big group where there were loads of people moving around and all the rest of it. And I was sitting in the holding group. I started to feel really angry.
Mm.
And I blurted out in the end, this is all crazy. They're talking a load of rubbish. This is not true, you know, this kind of voice.
Mm.
And he turned to the client, you know, and said, what do you think? She said, oh, that's my family exactly.
Mm.
I used to feel crazy, like nothing that's being said here is true. So in a way, I just spoke the voice of
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
family system
Yeah.
and the craziness that was going on, and it was what was happening was absolutely spot on for her. You know? It's
I,
amazing,
lo-
isn't it?
I love those moments. And
Yeah,
yeah, and I love it when we as facilitators have the insight and imagination to hold it as a part of the system.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm.
So I'm wondering with guilt, where I mean, I learned psychologically that guilt comes a bit later developmentally than shame. Does that fit with your research into the brain?
It actually does, and it fits
Uh,
with my latest thinkings about guilt, my noticings. I was just working in a very religious a country that had a lot of religious guilt kind of embedded into the structure of the country, woven into the fabric,
mhm.
and a- and with um, with guilt, you have to apparently have a sense of cognition. Like it comes later. There's a thought component to guilt. And for the first 3 years, Alan Shore says that really we're working on getting our right hemispheres organized. I mean, that's the task of those first 3 years is emotional self-connection, being reflected and resonated with in our emotions, creating the beautiful holding neurons that are in the right hemisphere that give us an easier path through life. Um, and then that when language starts to come online, then
Mhm.
that's sort of the percolating of the left hemisphere. Now the neurons are starting to grow in the left hemisphere. And the left hemisphere is really the home of cognition and of uh, I mean, cognition is a full body experience, but
Sure.
worded cognition, verbalized thought is the left hemisphere. And guilt is really verbalized thought. Now, the left hemisphere by itself doesn't have the capacity to feel sadness. It only really has the way that it integrates new information is by blaming. So
Uh-huh.
guilt is in essence a way to try to assign responsibility and
Right.
to take the blame
Yeah.
for something that has gone wrong, that has happened, that we don't wish to have happen. And lately, I've been working very simply um, with whenever a representative or a client says, I feel so guilty, to ask them to say, I feel so sad that this has happened.
Mm,
I
mm,
feel so much sorrow and regret.
mm.
And then I say, okay, do you still need to say that you feel guilty? 99 times out of 100, they've been like, no, that's gone.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Interesting. I can feel it in my body as you say it. There's
yeah,
a
yeah.
totally different physical state that
Mm,
goes with saying I'm full of regret and I feel
yeah,
sad. It's like facing up to
yeah,
whatever the issue is. And I
yeah,
remember Bert Hellinger saying about that, the difference between guilt, which is that facing up to, and guilty feelings, which is the head hung low, I've done a terrible thing, which isn't
mm,
looking. It's
mm,
almost like a kind of self-absorption. You know,
Hmm.
there's something else I wanted to ask you about in connection to that. I remember watching a YouTube video about this young child. I think she was about 4 or 5 years old, and this guy was interviewing her, and it was a kind of a psychopathic energy. Like, so
Hmm.
she said, "Oh, mum and dad locked me in my bedroom at night." So the interview says, "Oh, why is that?" "Oh, because they know that I would just go and get a knife and kill my brother. I've done that a few times." And she's talking like this,
Hmm.
no sense of guilt
Hmm.
or awareness, or in a completely
Hmm.
dissociated state. And
Hmm.
then they showed her again. I don't know how much later it was. They'd worked with her on a regular
Hmm.
basis, and she looked. I mean, in the first image, she looked really like a beautiful little girl,
Hmm.
with no worries in the world, but saying
Hmm.
these horrendous things. And then, however long later, I think it was 18 months, 2 years later, she was like a burdened adult
Oh, how
because she'd
interesting.
suddenly found conscience
Wow. Wow.
and was facing
Hmm.
this violent energy. I mean, it wasn't her energy, of course, at that age, it was in the system, but she
Yeah.
was really facing up to it, and
Hmm.
I felt so sad for this little child because it was such a burden for
Hmm.
her, and she'd gone from blissful dissociation in a
Yeah.
way
Yeah.
to awareness and facing up to it. So I'm wondering
Hmm.
what's the process in the brain that takes us from that psychopathic no conscience energy into facing up to something and feeling guilt.
Well, it does seem like there's a brain development stuff, when when you have a 2-year-old and the new baby comes, the 2-year-old often wants to kill the baby.
Yeah, yeah,
It's quite common.
yeah,
I've
yeah.
met many 2-year-olds who wanted to kill their baby brothers.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's what we do with that energy, isn't it?
Right, right. And whether it gets, there's also the question of, because I think it can start quite a bit before 5 years old, and that's probably what was extraordinary with this child, was that it hadn't naturally transitioned. But I
Mm,
think that we can, if somebody's going, of course, of course you don't want your brother to be here.
yeah,
Of course
yeah,
it's hard. Of
yeah.
course you're angry. Of course you're sad. Of course you need acknowledgement that the world has changed.
Mm,
Already at 2 years old, a little one will respond to these kinds of linkings of emotion and desire,
yeah.
which
Helping them
is,
make sense of their
yeah,
experience. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Rather than saying, no, 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 of course you love your brother. You know, we know that you don't really hate him. Of course you love
we
him
don't, we
dearly, do
don't,
you? You know,
we don't say that in this house.
exactly. No, don't smack Johnny. Be nice to him. You must share. You must learn to share. All done with the very best of intentions. I
Oh,
don't want my child to turn out like a psychopath.
right, exactly. There's been some beautiful research about psychopaths that I may have mentioned in our conversations before. I don't know. Um, a fellow in the United States was studying psychopaths,
Mm-hmm.
and he was going around to the prisons and he was doing fMRIs on the murderers in the prison to look and see what was happening with their brains. And what he was finding was that over and over again, an area of the brain called the right orbitofrontal cortex was dark.
Uh-huh.
A kind of a swath, a little strip of brain
So
tissue.
like the
Yeah,
middle of the scalp forward to
in
the
the right
forehead.
hemisphere, not quite in the
Oh, okay.
corpus callosum, but in the right hemisphere.
Right.
And so he was at like a Thanksgiving dinner with his grandmother, and she said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "Oh, I'm doing fMRIs on murderers to see what's happening with their brains." And she said, "Oh, we have murderers in our family. I wonder what our brains look like." So he
Goodness me. Strange question.
so he did an MRI of his own brain, and he discovered that he had the same area dark.
Wow.
Yeah, that was dark in the murderers. But the difference between them was that he had had a beautiful, sweet, lovely childhood with
Right.
warm parenting.
Mm.
And the folks that he was doing the fMRIs with had had traumatic experiences with abuse and neglect.
Right. Right.
So, it's, as always, it's this incredible dance between nature and nurture.
Nature, nurture. Yeah.
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 What are we given, but then how are we treated?
Yeah.
Is
So you
so
have the
key.
predisposition
Mm-hmm.
transgenerationally or
Yeah.
systemically,
Right.
but how you're responded to and resonated with
Yeah.
determines whether that becomes murder or it's just a dark patch on your brain. Yeah.
Right. Right. And he said that the way that it was reflected for him was in high risk behavior. That he
Oh, okay.
loved like X game sports kind of things.
Yeah.
And that he saw this dark orbitofrontal cortex manifesting itself, but not as psychopathy, rather than
So
in.
that's a kind of
Yeah.
an excitement about death. Is that it? Is it
I
like that?
don't know. He didn't draw that
Talking
correlation, but
about
that's a
death,
beautiful
right?
question.
Yeah. I mean, that's what it feels like to me because I
Yeah.
often say, oh, this person who wants to climb mountains and do what for me would be ridiculously dangerous things to do. Oh, they're dancing with death.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
there's such a high adrenaline in that,
Mm-hmm.
that it is. And I imagine, I don't know, I've never killed anyone, but I imagine that energy is
Yeah.
similar.
Yeah, it very well may
It's
be.
high,
Yeah, if you don't.
passionate energy, isn't it?
Yeah, and a part of what the right orbital frontal cortex gives us is really a sense of other as
Right,
existing and as, mattering. And with the warmth in his family, he still had a sense of others mattering.
right, right.
Um, but it wasn't.
But he mattered.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
But it wasn't, what were you going to say?
I'm trying to remember his words. He did see that there was a way that he was less careful with others than he observed, like socially and emotionally, than he observed others being with each other. He did feel like it did show up in that,
Right.
in some of his social interactions.
So there's some missing empathy or something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But I find it very heartening that we can be so changed by warmth
Yeah.
uh, and responsiveness. Yeah,
Well, you
yeah.
were saying about this in your first book, weren't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
It's not what happens to us, it's how we're resonated with.
Yes, or
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
post-traumatic bit.
yeah,
Mm,
yeah.
mm,
No kidding.
mm.
Yeah. But this is taking us toward our next topic, which is death. Uh,
Mhm,
we were thinking, we were both thinking a little bit about death,
mhm.
and mm, at this moment, I'm just so interested in the death of self, the progressive deaths of self that happen in the healing process.
Mhm.
The deaths of ideas that we have about ourselves. I was just recently traveling in Norway, and I had the chance to um, to discover. I had lived there when I was 16,
Mhm.
and I had this sense in this last trip of recovering my of beginning to see the way in which I was so alone there when I was 16, and that it changed me being so alone there. I was so relieved at the time to get out of my family of origin home,
Mhm.
um, to be able to have kind of a break from the way in which my mother and I were impacting each other so intensely. My
Mhm.
mom dealing with the after effects of terrible childhood trauma, and me trying to figure out uh, how to exist. I was very dissociated, and I
Right.
think as a result of her carrying her trauma forward. And I had a chance in Norway this time to touch both what the sweet things were with that year in Norway that I lived there, and also the losses that I at least haven't named for myself recently. A loss of a kind of an American. At the time that I went to Norway, they hadn't yet really gotten into their oil money.
Right.
So it was still a fairly low income place in many ways. Beautiful Scandinavian socialism already in place. A lot of care for everybody, but not a lot of joy in public places.
Right. So what was the aspect of yourself that died when you got there then?
An aspect of myself that died was an innocent joy, an expectation that when I would smile into the world would smile back at me. At that point in Norway's history, in the area of Norway that I was living in, there was not a lot of smiling back. Yeah, it's sort of like I learned not to expect smiles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I find that culturally interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Smiling and not smiling, you know. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
in Romania a lot, and when
Ah.
I go into the shops in Romania, I never see a shop assistant smile,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
find it disconcerting.
I think I
I
found
mean,
it disconcerting when I was 16.
I remember my daughter when she went to, you know, do a job when she was 15, like a Saturday job or something, and it was in a supermarket, and they said part of the training is you have to smile at the customers. You know? And she felt this like, I'm not going to smile if I don't feel like smiling. I'm not going to smile. But there is something of that in
Yeah.
the UK. I don't know how it is in the States. You know,
Yeah.
oh, you know, I'm in the service industry. I must smile.
Yes.
So I
Yeah.
had quite a bit of admiration in Romania for them not smiling.
Yeah. Yeah.
Felt a bit truer. Anyway, that's
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
aside away from death.
I think in Russia there's not so much smiling.
Right.
Yeah.
More genuine somehow.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, back to death.
So yeah, so a sense of a kind of a little radiant innocence that died a bit, you know,
Right.
in that experience. And then it was sweet this time to remember her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I guess, you know, if you don't know that that's happening, then you don't grieve the
Right.
loss.
Yeah,
You might
exactly.
just feel sad and not know why you feel sad.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Or come back different
Yeah.
and know it on some levels. But I think now it's a bit like you saying you were disconcerted in Romania. You know, there's a self-understanding and a
Yeah.
noticing that's happening there for you. And and uh, and now I have this information about Beatrice Beebe's research, and about how much joy is a dyadic experience.
Right.
How
Yeah.
much we're noticing without even realizing it,
Mm.
whether we're supporting one another's expressions of happiness or joy.
Mm.
I have my class do this funny, very short. It's a bit artificial, but it still gives us a sense. Working in dyads, and one person smiles bigger, just kind of makes a big smile, and the other person does a smaller smile in response. And then you feel it. You feel yourself trying to move down to adjust, you know, and then having the other person smile, and the other person smiles bigger, and
Right.
then seeing what that feels like and what opens there. And like I said, it's a bit artificial, but it does give you this sense of the extent to which we are, when we're in relationship, and bubbles of joy or delight or happiness arise. How are they either diminished or expanded?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they can be infectious, can't
Yeah.
they?
Yeah.
Laughter can be really infectious. If somebody
Yeah.
starts laughing, it just
Yeah.
opens up laughter in the whole system, doesn't it?
Hmm. Yeah.
But of course, then there's laughter that's deflection away from
Yeah.
something that's really
Yeah.
unbearable.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes. Yes.
that's
As
tricky to manage.
Yeah. 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 That we
And
laugh
fear
when
of
we're.
death would be one of those. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. So that's very much where I am in terms of an interest in death in this moment. What's happening with you in relationship to death and constellations
Well,
and your?
what I've seen is like I remember this was a long time ago working in a constellation workshop where a woman was there for I think it was just a 2-day workshop. She was in black the whole time, and I was conscious that she was in black. So somehow it had a resonance. And don't remember her constellation at all. But I set up somebody for death, and she didn't know it was death at the time. I just did it blindly. And she rushed over and put her arms around Death.
Oh.
Oh, this feels so wonderfully warm. I love this person. Oh, it's really amazing, And I let her just be there for a moment. And then she said, "Who is it? Who is it? Is it this? Is it that?" And I said, "It's Death." She went, "No, I don't want it." And immediately push this person away.
Interesting. Wow.
And I said to her, "So the person that rushed to death before is like your soul. Your soul just moved to death and really loved embracing death. Some cognitive part of you that knows it's death goes, oh no, So it's like these two different parts of you. It's so fascinating.
Yeah.
Oh no, I don't want to die yet. But I'm wearing black, and actually I run over and I embrace death. And then if I really embrace it, somehow I can come more fully into life.
Yeah.
Of course, some people will die with that process. And it's about, as a facilitator, I think, being fearless about allowing someone to go to death, if that's where they need to go. And it usually works paradoxically. Then you come into life.
Yeah. It's so important, isn't it?
Yeah. And some people are this kind of in-between place, not fully dead, not fully alive.
Yeah.
And that can be for various reasons. Sometimes it's their birth, that they haven't really incarnated when they were born, or they have an accident or a serious illness and almost die.
Yes.
And then they don't know that they've come back.
Yes.
There's a lot of reasons for it. Or there's someone who's died in strange circumstances that's pulling on them.
Yes.
Like a co-creation. They're not letting the dead person go, and the dead person's not letting them go. And I remember Albrecht writing about that many, many years ago. I think it was issue 6 of the Knowing Field, a long time ago. How we can heal that process for both the living and the dead. And we don't know what happens when we die. There's many theories about it, but within constellations, it does seem like there are some beings that don't fully leave.
Yeah.
They're kind of hovering in some way and pulling on the living. So you've got this dance between the two, and one won't let the other one go. Like I remember being an Irish woman in a constellation at the time of the famine. And I was wandering about, just seeing corpses on the floor, nothing but corpses. And somebody just came up and tapped me on the shoulder and said, "You're dead. You're dead." And I had to hear it like 4 or 5 times before it really sank in, because I was walking around seeing corpses. It's a weird thing. But it's really helpful to be a representative and have that experience in your own body. Of thinking you're alive,
And we see this with the unconscious contract work. We see that a child has a contract with a parent, and the parent is like, yes, this is a very good contract. And we say to the parent, do you know that you're dead? And they're like, oh, well, this isn't a good contract anymore.
Yeah. Wonderful. I remember seeing a film, I think it was Hunter Beaumont actually. It was about an Indian tribe, and this child had died at the age of 11, I think in an accident or something like that. And there was a shaman, and this shaman allowed the soul of this child to come into him, and it was
Mm.
really fascinating to watch. His whole body changed, and his
Wow.
face, and he looked like an 11-year-old child.
Wow.
And they said, we have to keep the mother out of the way until
Mm.
this child's soul can come back and then
Wow.
leave fully.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then we can bring the mother in.
Yeah.
Because
Makes
if the mother
perfect sense.
comes in before, she'll interfere
Right. She won't want the
with
child
that
to
process
leave.
of the soul. And
Yeah.
that's absolutely fascinating.
Mm.
Like, I don't have
Incredible.
to believe or not believe in any of it. I just
Mm.
witnessed something that I found amazing.
Mm.
You
And
know,
then there's
how it
th-
went. You know?
this kind of segues for us into our final subject of conversation this morning, which is about decolonization. And there's sort of in a way, I mean, there's a necessary death of empire
Yes, yeah.
that's a part of decolonization.
And I think this is what we're struggling with in Britain around Brexit.
Mm, mm,
You know, this massive split that is in our country has always been there, but it's brought it to a head between those who are saying, that is dead, you know, we are Britain now,
mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
those who are saying, we're great, you know, oh, we want back that greatness, you know, I want the Britain that I had when I was a child, and, you know, it's like, it's a kind of it's sad in a way, it's like a
Mm,
dream, some dream of times past, you know,
yeah. Yeah.
it's gone, it's gone. Oh, we can stand alone. We don't have to be in Europe. You know, we're great. We'll manage by ourselves. You know, no, we won't. So this polarized, really polarized state that we're in. I mean, it's really
Yeah.
incredible. And
Yeah.
deep belief that utopia belongs in the Brexit section of we leave Europe, we'll be in utopia. No more immigration, you know. Oh, isn't that a wonderful thing, you know? Oh, we're all white, isn't that wonderful? It's fascinating.
Yes, and I think that's very true for the U.S. as well. You know,
Right.
the
Yeah,
MAGA hats make America great again. You know, hats that are part of
yeah,
Trump's campaign, and yeah, and the American empire, and
yeah.
yeah,
And the polarization that gets created, you know, this
mm,
swing to the right, which I
yeah,
think comes from fear, basically.
yes, I think so too.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
But you
yeah.
know, I mean, I was talking, we were having kind of regular meetings. You remember we had that colonialism workshop, which
Yes,
you'll have
yes.
to go with Hang and came to. And we've been having regular meetings, you know, with some black people, some white people, etc. And somebody, a black woman was saying in the group, you know, we need to also face up to the fact that we were complicit. Some of us were complicit in the slavery that happened.
Mm,
You know, we had slaves ourselves. We joined the slave trade. We handed over some of our people. You know, it's really interesting. You know, it's like this is a
mm,
complicated field.
yes, it
But
is.
there is, I'm seeing a section of people in the UK willing to begin to look at this, and some towns, I will say which town it was, that's, you know, changing all the names of streets and monuments and all this sort of stuff that were to do with colonialism. You know, they're trying
Mm,
to kind of do something different, and then they were trying to get a memorial for slavery. You know, there's plenty of war
mm,
memorials. How about a memorial for slavery? And the opposition to that.
wow,
So, you know, there are people wanting it and people saying, absolutely not. You
wow.
know, again, it's another split that's there.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's a lot happening in the UK around it. I don't know if there is in the States.
Well, we're so occupied in present time struggles at the particular moment
Right,
that there's not much happening in terms of a historical retrospective.
right, right.
But I think it's at the root of what's bubbling.
With
It
the present
is
time
this.
struggles, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, in a way, I mean, I kind of see that Boris Johnson is very similar to Trump. You know,
Yes.
there's some similarity between what's happening in the States and what's happening here in England.
Yeah, yeah.
But polarization between Obama and Trump.
Yep.
That's sort of, it's a real split, isn't it, in the population?
It's incredible.
Yeah, and
It's
that's the
like
wider
two
field. And then
different
how's that
worlds.
individually, with trauma and splitting and
Yeah, we're in the middle of the impeachment inquiries, and the people who are on the Trump side of things can't even integrate the information.
No.
They just deny it. So it's like a mass hysteria, a mass hypnotism.
But you see, isn't that what happens with trauma?
Yeah.
The whole field narrows, and all you've got is reactivity. There isn't space for seeing grey. There's only black or white.
Yeah.
There's nothing in the middle for, there's this and there's this and there's this. This is complex, actually.
Yeah.
It's not left or right.
Right.
There's a whole lot in the middle there somewhere.
Yeah.
It's not be in the European Union or not be in the European Union, Were it that simple, it isn't. It's really complicated.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're tussling with, and the difficulty in making a decision. I mean, I don't know how long it's dragged on. And we're a laughingstock in Europe, because we're so ridiculous about it. It seems ridiculous, but it's actually democracy at work.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah. Very interesting. Lots of directions for this.
Yeah.
Well, it's been a wonderful conversation today, Barbara.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was lovely.
It'll be fun to
interesting
post.
journey. Yes.
I'm gonna so there.